All right, everyone. I'm Charlie Cradaville here to present about community choice aggregation for Woodbridge Township and share with you some information about the proposal for a gas power plant in Woodbridge that we're working hard to stop. So I probably don't have to tell you all why clean energy is better for our communities, but here's a few reasons real quick. So our air is already very polluted. We've had a lot of industrial pollution over the years in New Jersey. And now that we have a respiratory illness circulating like COVID-19, it's actually killing more people in areas that have high pollution. Climate change also threatens New Jersey specifically because of our coastal communities. But we're also just seeing more and more extreme weather, destructive storms, and increased ozone pollution. Climate change is a part of that. And I know Woodbridge in particular has had flooding issues that are only going to get worse if climate change continues to be exacerbated by proposals like the one for the Keasbey power plant. So CCA, community choice aggregation, is a practical way to combat the effects of global warming by expanding the choices that consumers have, the people who are purchasing electricity. And so the basics are that, right now we only get, or in New Jersey, we only produce about 5% of the electricity here from renewable sources. The remainder comes almost entirely from natural gas and nuclear. But there are ambitious plans to expand solar and wind, and they're going online rapidly throughout the region. And the cost of renewable energy is beginning to fall below the cost of fossil fuels we're seeing for the first time. And so thanks to a law passed in 2003 called the New Jersey Government Energy Aggregation Act, towns and cities actually have more choices for where to get their electricity, where they actually source it from. And we'll get into that here. So it's called community choice aggregation, sometimes also referred to as community energy aggregation or government energy aggregation. But these are programs that empower the towns or counties even to offer residents a additional clean energy option through their existing utility service. And basically the way it works is the municipalities use a public bidding process to make a bulk purchase of electricity on behalf of their residents. And the reason that it's worthwhile is because they can set higher standards for how much of the energy comes from renewables than what the incumbent utility, in this case PSE&G, is providing. So currently that's like 21% is the state mandated minimum. So 21% of electricity sources must be renewables. But towns and cities can set higher standards and go on the open market. We're part of a grid that includes over a dozen states, and you can purchase the cleaner energy through that bidding process. And from the consumer's end, it basically is not very different. You're still getting the same bill from the same utility company. The electricity is arriving on the same wires. You've got the same meter in your house. It's read by the same people. And yeah, PSE&G is still going to handle all the billing and meter reading and all that stuff. But the source of the electricity changes. Through this program, there would be a third-party supplier that would be selected through that public bidding process. They would award it to the lowest responsible bidder, and they would meet a higher standard for renewables. So could be 50%, could be 100%, but more than 21% renewables. And another advantage is that the price remains flat for the duration of the contract. Contracts are usually 1 to 2 years at a time. And so unlike PSE&G, which changes their rates usually every month, the customers who are a part of this program would enjoy a flat, stable, predictable rate. And so we've put together a model ordinance that's been passed in many New Jersey communities that helps to phase in more renewables. So the numbers on the screen that you see there, 50% starting off, working its way up to 100% by the end of the decade, are for a good reason. We need to get to 100% very soon, and that's what the world's leading climate scientists are telling us we have to do to avoid the most catastrophic consequences of the climate crisis. So by phasing in, we can make this a reality in our communities and get to that goal by the end of the decade, but we've got to start now. So as I mentioned, just like when a township purchases vehicles or any other goods or services, they go through a competitive bidding process to select the lowest responsible bidder. And there are, I believe, over 60 energy suppliers certified by the BPU to provide this. And so you would go out on the market, advertise what your town needs, and then you'll get the bids and you pick the lowest responsible bidder to provide the energy for the program. And there's usually pretty significant cost savings that comes from buying in bulk. When you talk about one household getting electricity on the open market, or selecting a third-party supplier for their electricity, you only have so much bargaining power, so much negotiating power that you can to get the best price on that. And often we see folks end up paying higher rates. But when you're talking about 100,000 people, 30,000 households in Woodbridge, we see, just like when you go to Costco and you buy goods in bulk, we see a savings that comes from that bulk purchasing. And again, there's more stability in pricing because the rates remain stable throughout the contract. And residents can opt in or out at any time. So it's just one more option for them. Currently, residents do have the option to go out on the market and select their own third-party supplier. This would be one additional option that would have the additional benefits of bulk purchasing and the stable price. So this is something that's been done successfully. I'm a New Brunswick resident and was proud to be a beneficiary of this program. This was the first city that we worked in to get this policy passed, and it was a great success. So the rates for our first contract were consistently below PSE&G's price to compare. We saved more than 6%, sometimes almost as high as 20% on the electricity supply portion of our bill. We're currently bidding for a second supply contract, and these are the prices for the first supply contract. We actually had two different options. So residents by default would get the 50% renewable, but if they wanted to, they could pay a little extra and go straight to 100% and get there right away. And so both of those prices, for the record, were cheaper than what PSE&G was charging for 21% renewables, the state minimum. So this was a great success and just one of many. You can see Sustainable Essex Alliance is a group of 7 towns that teamed up to get a program going. It relaunched April 1st, and they are doing double the renewable energy offered by PSE&G. Plus they're getting a cost savings. Currently PSE&G charges about 13.4 cents per kilowatt hour. So you can see the 50% renewable rate is significantly cheaper than that. The 100% renewable rate is comparable. It's a little bit more expensive at the moment to do the 100% renewable, but it's very by a very small margin. And so, yeah, we've worked in a number of towns to get these things going. And there's 2 ways to do it. So, one is the old fashioned way, just, asking nicely, building pressure, and, lobbying the elected officials to do the right thing. And so that's what happened in South Brunswick last year, in Red Bank, and just a couple weeks ago in Asbury Park, where these councils, after hearing about this and hearing from their residents about this, decided to adopt our model ordinance to implement community choice aggregation and get to 100% renewables by the end of the decade. But there's another way. In some towns in New Jersey, many towns in New Jersey, we have the right to pass our own laws, and residents can get together, draft an ordinance, and get signatures on that ordinance to force a vote to take place. So that's what we did in these 5 towns. In New Brunswick, we had we had a great time submitting our petition, and then speaking to the council about it, and the council ultimately did the right thing and they passed it into law as it was written. And that was the beginning of the New Brunswick renewable CCA program. But in other communities, we actually take it to the ballot. So the way it works is if the council does not adopt your ordinance, but you got enough signatures to pass it, well, then it actually gets put to the entire township for a public election in the general election, and the voters get the final say. It's put on as a ballot question, a yes or no question, and if more people vote yes than no, then it becomes law. And that's what happened in Piscataway in 2019, where 64% of voters voted yes to the ballot question, and now Piscataway has a renewable energy aggregation program, thanks to those residents. And last year in East Brunswick, 69% of the residents there voted yes to adopt our model ordinance, starting at 50% and getting the township to 100% by the end of the decade. 2021, we have big plans. We would love to see Woodbridge adopt this, either by the council vote or by referendum. And we're also working in 4 other towns in New Jersey to initiate these ordinances by actually getting petition signatures to force the vote to happen. And an added twist is that due to the pandemic, we have the ability to actually circulate these petitions online using the internet. So that's going to make things a little bit easier, but we do have an ambitious goal to get 1,900 signatures in the next 8 weeks. So we're going to need your help. And then I do want to shift gears to the hot topic in Woodbridge right now, the plan for a new 630 megawatt gas power plant in the Keasbey section of Woodbridge. You can see on this map here, Woodbridge is made up of 10 different smaller towns, and Keasbey is the southernmost of those towns. That red square you see there is where the proposed power plant would go, right near the Raritan River and some of these other communities that you see listed. This is, needless to say, not something we want, not something we need, and it's in fact something we need to stop. So as you may know, there's already a giant gas power plant at this site. This is known as the Woodbridge Energy Center, and it opened in 2016. The company that opened it is called Competitive Power Ventures, and they didn't tell us at the time, but they had a plan to build a second one right next to it. And so now this gravel area that's currently like a parking field is where they want to build that new one, the Keasbey Energy Center. And so, yeah, I already kind of mentioned this stuff. It's, a very low number of jobs created by the power plant. We're talking about 22 employees for the first one. It actually has a deal with the County Utilities Authority to supply gray water to cool the equipment. So the county government is on board and enabling this facility. And they even built a pipeline under the Raritan River to send that gray water there. And then the next one, the proposal for the Keasbey Energy Center, the one that we are hopeful about defeating, is already approved by the Woodbridge Planning Board. I was there in 2018 when they unanimously voted to give it the green light, but thankfully, that's not the only approval they need. They also need air permit, permission to pollute the air. And just gonna add a couple other people to the room. Hi, Esther, thanks for joining us. Sorry to keep you waiting. So the Keasbey Energy Center is going to require permission to add a lot of pollution to our atmosphere. You can see here, this is straight from the air pollution permit application on file with the Department of Environmental Protection. It has not been approved. It's in a bit of a holding pattern. The DEP found it to be technically deficient, and they are basically. Esther, is that you?
Yeah, I had two things on, so I shut one off. Sorry.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, no problem. Thanks for being here. So yeah, so CPB wants permission to add all these pollutants into the air. You can see it's a significant amount of each of them. And the one that's not listed here is the greenhouse gas emissions. They want to add more than 2 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, greenhouse gases into the atmosphere on top of what the existing Woodbridge Energy Center is already, emitting. So that would bring us to about 4.6 million tons of greenhouse gases every year. And then all of these numbers for the nitrogen oxides, ammonia, particulate matter, carbon monoxide, all these terrible things. These are all every year. They want to pollute that much. They want permission to be able to pollute up to that much. And it's up to the DEP whether or not to grant it. So let's take a look at what this means for the neighboring communities, in particular public schools. I want to thank Bill McClelland for putting together this visualization. There are 70 plus New Jersey public schools within a 6-mile radius. I did not have time to look into Staten Island, but I'm sure there are some schools there as well. And yeah, this is a serious environmental justice issue. You can see the entire Perth Amboy School District is within 3 miles of the Keasbey power plant. You can see there are schools within 1.5 miles of the power plant. Also within 3 miles, we have a number of schools in Edison, Metuchen, and as we go out to the 6-mile radius, even here in New Brunswick, one of our schools, Highland Park, and we can see that almost the entire Edison School District is within that 6-mile radius, as well as schools in Sayreville and South Amboy. So, this is something that would affect children, and in particular, low-income children and children who are already living in what's deemed to be overburdened communities in under the state's new environmental justice law. All of these communities I mentioned are deemed overburdened under that law. And therefore, there are going to be some rules promulgated for additional, restrictions and requirements to be in place before any new major sources of pollution are approved. So we're hopeful that that environmental justice law and just the reality of what is being proposed will help to make the case to defeat this power plant. And I also have to mention that when Governor Christie and Mayor McCormick announced the first power plant, they paired it up with a plan to revitalize the contaminated Raritan River waterfront, and they promised a new glorious waterfront park. Well, here it is. You can see it is not a waterfront park, and it is not glorious, and it is not done. Many years later, the first announcement of this came in 2011 when they were accepted into the Brownfields Area Development Program of the DEP. As the power plant proposal moved forward, they kept touting this great new waterfront park and how it was such a good deal for the community because, yeah, we're going to have a power plant, but we're also going to have, for the first time in 100 years, we're going to be able to access the waterfront. We're going to have platforms to watch the birds and trails for people to explore and all this great stuff. And they kept talking a big game about it. And even as recently as 2015, the mayor's spokesperson was publishing things in the newspaper saying that it was scheduled for completion in 2016. And so here we are. This photo was taken just last weekend. And we were actually shortly after this photo was taken, somebody drove up to us and said, "You can't be here. This is not, this is not public." Yeah, this is just one piece of the puzzle. There's also some serious concerns about the company that wants to build the power plant. Competitive Power Ventures was involved in a bribery scandal where people went to prison. You may have heard about Governor Cuomo's aide, Joe Percoco, who was taking bribes, over $300,000 in bribes, including a $90,000 low show job that was given to his wife by the company. And a CPB executive also pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit wire fraud in relation to this bribery. Peter Galbraith Kelly, also known as Braith Kelly, was basically running the payments to Percoco and disguising them so that it wasn't obvious what this was all about. Braith Kelly pled guilty and I believe was sentenced to 14 months in prison. And I also learned that Braith Kelly was one of the founding partners of Black, Manafort, Stone, and Kelly. And yes, that Manafort and that Stone. Yeah, that's cause for concern here. And also some new news that we just found out recently is that CPV was actually acquired by an Israeli company called OPC Energy. I believe it was $630 million they paid to acquire all of their assets, including their so-called development pipeline, which includes the Keasbey Energy Center. And they are owned by another Israeli-based company, Kenon Holdings Limited. And so it's unclear what this means for the future of the proposal for Woodbridge, but definitely something that we're keeping an eye on. So what can we do about all this stuff? Well, we need to transition to 100% renewables ASAP. And the best way to do that is to get the township to adopt a CCA ordinance. We're also going to fight that Title V air permit and any other DEP approvals that may be needed, and ultimately build pressure on the governor to declare a moratorium on all new fossil fuel infrastructure. If we're going to truly be committed to changing our ways and getting off the fossil fuel addiction and switching to renewables, we can't be building more fossil fuel infrastructure because that's only going to lock us in to using that stuff for decades to come. So we are working through a coalition called Empower New Jersey with all of the leading environmental groups in New Jersey to push for that goal and to achieve that. So that's what we're working on. Thank you for watching my presentation, and